Good morning, everyone. I'm Muriel Bowser. Welcome to the beautiful Rosedale Recreation Center in the Rosedale community. My greetings to the ANC representatives here and community leaders. Today, we are joined by the members of the Metropolitan Police Department to talk about the police department's Summer Crime Initiative, which has been an initiative at MPD for many years. And the chief will talk about the focus this year, along with the personnel who will be involved. Before we get to that, however, I want to turn to the chairman of the Council of the District of Columbia. As has been our practice for the last year, the chairman has joined us to provide his legislative update in advance of a legislative meeting. So let me turn to Phil.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Good morning. As has been our practice since the beginning of the pandemic, I do have this press conference before a legislative meeting, and tomorrow, May 4th, is a legislative meeting. And so rather than having competing press conferences, we've combined, and I appreciate the mayor's working with us on that. We have a committee of the whole that will start at noon, followed by the legislative meeting. And the committee of the whole is just processing bills that have come out of other committees. At the legislative meeting, probably of some interest to some of you, is confirmation of a number of appointments. There are two appointments by the council to the Metropolitan, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, WMATA. Lucinda Babers will be a permanent member of the WMATA board representing the district, and Tom Bolger's being reappointed as an alternate member of the board. This will get us to a full complement of representatives, permanent representatives at Metro. We also are going to have a very close vote, Chief, on your confirmation. I expect it'll be 13-0. This is the confirmation of the mayor's nomination of Robert Conti to be the chief of Metropolitan Police Department. Monica Palacio as director of the Office of Human Rights, and Margaret Colleen Curry as the chief administrative law judge of the Office of Administrative Hearings. Those are all on the agenda as well for tomorrow. There are a couple of contracts which I think are of not particular note. But then on the non-consent agenda, we will have first reading on the Comprehensive Plan Act, the Amendment Act. This is a rather extensive legislation. In fact, the attachments to the bill itself is about 4 pages, but the attachments are 25 chapters to the Comprehensive Plan, about 1,500 pages. It's on non-consent because there will be some amendments, and we will try to circulate those amendments this afternoon. I expect the amendments will be about 30 pages in length. Alternatively, we could do an amendment in nature of a substitute, but then that would be 1,500 pages. So the amendments are meant to respond to comments that I've gotten from other council members, as well as some of the more active groups from the Grassroots Planning Coalition to the DC Building Industry Association and other groups, responding in terms of strengthening some language that furthers the goal, which is different in this plan than in previous plans, of doing everything we can to encourage and facilitate the development of housing and affordable housing, as well as, for the first time, requiring a racial equity lens on the part of decision makers in the land use process. There's been some criticism in that regard, and so I just want to make a couple of comments there. When the mayor sent down the amendments, April a year ago, no one was at that time talking explicitly about how planning had to have a racial equity lens. Things have changed in the past year, and now there is a council office on racial equity, and the mayor has an office on racial equity, and there are chiefs of racial equity in both offices, and so there's quite a bit more attention and sensitivity to this issue. So some of the criticism which speaks to the amendments as introduced by the mayor, in my view, are misplaced, and what we have done through the committee markup as well as with the amendments tomorrow, is emphasize, strengthen, and reinforce a commitment to racial equity in the land use process. Also, I want to note that the plan by itself is just a plan, and it does not actually change things such as some of the legacies of racism that we have in our city. It lays out a process for looking at how we change those legacies. So, as I've said, there is an emphasis on housing and affordable housing. There is an emphasis on empowering marginalized communities in participating in the land use process, and there's an emphasis on having a racial equity lens. So there will be amendments on top of what we did with the legislation at markup 2 weeks ago, and we've been moving this slowly, although the final reading could be in 2 weeks. There also are roughly 8 or 9 emergency bills. I'm not going to go through all of those. One of them is to extend the mayor's authority with regard to the public health emergency. Now, that authority runs out toward the end of this month, and because there's some work going on with regard to some of the provisions in the bill, it's possible that we will not be voting on that tomorrow. We'll be voting on it in 2 weeks. In any event, that is on the agenda. There also is an emergency bill that speaks to funding for our schools, to make clear the council's commitment that schools should not be seeing a reduction in their individual school budget for the next school year, that we need to be building on the budgets of the schools from the current year. I spoke as recently as this weekend with the chancellor, and he's indicated to me a commitment in that regard, but we're going forward with the legislation nonetheless. I'm not covering all of the emergencies, but I'm happy to take some questions if there are any on any of the measures on the agenda, if there are any questions. Is that Tom Sherwood?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it is.
No, I'll just go.
Oh, okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, at the end of the council's actions on the comp plan, will it be the same, easier, or harder for individuals or groups to successfully go into court to block or delay planned unit developments? It's been one of the biggest complaints among the development community.
The answer to that is not simple, just as the criticism of the process has not been simple. I would say that in terms of somebody being able to file an appeal, that's a matter of almost anybody can file a matter in the courts.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I said successfully, not just like anybody can file. I asked, could they successfully go into court?
I would say it will be more difficult. It will be more difficult because we've provided more clarity with regard to the comprehensive plan. And, there are inherently conflicting priorities. And a problem in the past is that the Zoning Commission, in its orders, did not address those conflicts. Its orders were not well written, or not as well written as they should have been. So if you review any of those appellate orders, their opinions, they've made it clear that the Zoning Commission didn't speak to certain issues, like at McMillan didn't speak to certain issues. And when those were remanded and went back to the Zoning Commission and they reissued the order, then the Court of Appeals sustained the Zoning Commission's decision. So clarity is an important part of what was going on with the appeals. But we also, through the amendments, both the framework a couple years ago and the amendments we have before us now, have tried to address some of these conflicts and make it clear to the Zoning Commission where our priorities are. And because of that clarity, I think that'll make it easier as well for projects to go forward. Now, with regard to citizens being able to participate, if anything, I think we've made it clearer that the Zoning Commission has to make additional efforts to ensure that that citizens can participate, and particularly in what I referred to earlier as marginalized communities, that where you don't get a lot of participation, there should be added effort to ensure that those folks are heard from. There was a question up front. Yes, sir.
Council's Office on Racial Equity, that is your institution, the one that you've created?
Yes.
what is it standing with you? It has issued a report, as I understand it, that says the work of the committee, the bill, fails to address racism and the ongoing public health crisis in the district. You agree with that assessment?
I don't agree with it, but I also think that that's a misstatement. There's been a lot of criticism of the council's legislation misquoting from that racial equity analysis. The racial equity analysis was very critical of the legislation as introduced, and I think what you're reading is from that criticism of the bill as introduced. We worked closely with CORE, that's the Council Office on Racial Equity, and we made substantial revisions to the legislation to ensure that equity is involved in every step of the land use process. That is, when there's the planning, when development of the plan by the Office of Planning, or the Zoning Commission when they're thinking about setting down a case, or when a case actually goes forward. So we addressed the concerns raised by CORE, and if you look at I'm going to say the entirety of their analysis, you will see that they felt that they were quite clear that the bill that we are voting on is an improvement over the bills introduced in this regard.
Your revisions are now adequate to address these concerns?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask about, can you tell us what you think the effects will be of extending the public health emergency still further, and do you think that this will be the last time it's extended?
I think we're getting close, but I don't know that I would say this is the last time, and I think we're looking at extending it through or into July. The effect is that it continues to give the mayor authority to reopen, or if necessary, and I hope this doesn't happen, to dial back the openings. But as you know, we are not in the city fully open. I have to say that I support where the mayor's been on this, because following the public health experts is important, and I think we've seen that the city has done better than other jurisdictions in the country, which have seen a substantial spike in cases from time to time. So in any event, the effect is to the mayor to continue to have the authority to dial forward or backwards as necessary, the opening and closing. I think I saw another. Mitch, did you have were there any other questions? Yes, Colby.
Just one more. I need to understand where the council is with respect to its access to the mayor and the mayor's and staff. There was a dust-up, I think, over the last couple of weeks over some meetings that were being held and then not being held, and whether she was going to come or whether she wasn't going to come, and you seemed very wounded by all of this.
I seemed very what?
Wounded.
Oh yeah,
wounded
totally.
by this, and and I felt your pain, but
That's good.
But have you worked it out now that there will be some communication between the two of you that as contemplated in the Home Rule Act? I mean, you do have authority, as I understand it under the law, to get the information that you require from the executive branch, and you have subpoena authority as well. Why are you having these rules?
Well, let me say this. There are always going to be, in any government, there are always going to be some bumps between the two branches of government, but everything is fine right now. And the meetings have resumed, and I think we've had a couple, and I think everybody is right now just fine. So, but thank you for your concern, and I think I've overcome my pain. I can't speak for the mayor; she'll have to speak for herself. If there are no other, thank you for the question, though. If there are no other questions, thank you, Mayor Bowser.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mendelson. And I think that we're going to hear from Ms. Moore. Ms. Moore.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I just want to take this opportunity to say that my name is Sidel Moore, and I'm the chairperson of ANC 5D here in Northeast D.C. We represent Ivy City, Carver, Langston, and Trinidad. And I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you so much to everyone who's worked to make the Summer Crime Initiative possible. We truly appreciate your efforts to bring additional resources to communities like mine to help improve not only the safety but the well-being of residents. And so with that word of thanks, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Mayor Bowser.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. I want to thank all of the commissioners here in Rosedale and in 5D and all across the city who are working with us in an unprecedented way each and every day, just as we are working with the council in an unprecedented way each and every day, and as we have been throughout the pandemic. You heard from Ms. Moore that MPD and our agencies work with MPD every year on the Summer Crime Initiative. We know, unfortunately, that summer sometimes brings more outdoor activity, more conflict, and unfortunately, we brace ourselves and prepare ourselves for the possibility of more crime. Last year, for example, the Summer Crime Initiative was very effective in reducing theft in those areas by 46%, reducing burglaries by 29%, and producing an overall decrease in violent crime by 10%. And overall crime decreased by 25%. MPD doesn't do this alone. We work with all of our agencies, including DBH, DCPS, and DPR, to make sure that we have a holistic approach to dealing with neighborhoods where we have seen too much violent crime. We also ask our neighbors to stay engaged and to think about how they can keep their community safe. We've asked every year to focus on neighbors and neighborhoods and businesses that don't have private security cameras. The chief will tell you that video is very effective in solving crimes when they happen. To date, we've deployed more than 14,000 private security cameras in the district. And so please, if you haven't had a chance, go to ovsjg.dc.gov and apply for one. Before I turn it over to the chief, I also want to mention that part of us getting back to normal is having everybody get vaccinated. We had a hugely successful day of action on May 1st, so I want to thank my team, the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs, the Deputy Chief of Staff, and all involved in that day of action. Today is a day of action, too, right here at Rosedale. The Rosedale Rec is serving as a walk-up vaccination site. Anyone over the age of 18 can come here for walk-up vaccination up until 1 p.m. today. Go to vaccinate.dc.gov for all of the hours for our walk-up sites. So now I'm turning to the soon-to-be-confirmed. Let me thank the council members in advance for all of their questions and support, and I want to continue to ask them to send a loud and clear message tomorrow in their votes that Robert Conti is the next chief of police for the Metropolitan Police Department. Chief Conti.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, as I look around, and I couldn't help but standing here behind the mayor, just looking around and even acknowledging what's under my feet. You see, this rec center is it was my neighborhood rec center when I was a kid. This pool is the pool that I came to as a young kid, although it didn't look as nice as it does now. That's right. That's Willie Boo back there. I know who that is right there. It's good to see you. It's really good to see you. He's one of the long-standing coaches down here in the Rosedale community and has done a tremendous amount of work down here. So it's really, really good to see you. Good morning, and thank you all for being here today for the Summer Crime Initiative kickoff. I am Robert J. Conte III, the Acting Chief of Police of the Metropolitan Police Department. And I want to thank Mayor Bowser, all of our partner DC government agencies, and every member of the Metropolitan Police Department for coming together once again to combat violent crime and build safer and stronger neighborhoods. As we prepare to kick off this Summer Crime Prevention Initiative, it is certainly not lost on me the violent crime that we experienced in our city this past weekend, to include the shooting, the reckless disregard and the shooting of a 7-year-old that occurred over in the 6th District, over in Ward 7. As we see these types of events or these types of incidents, these types of crimes that happen in our community, certainly you will agree with me that these incidents, these crimes are unacceptable, and they should be unacceptable to everyone that's before me, everyone that's watching at home via television. These things are the reasons why we do the Summer Crime Initiative, and it's the reason why we are so committed to this, and we have been for so many years now. This is especially important as the summer is almost upon us, and our family and friends begin to spend more time outdoors, enjoying all that this great city has to offer. We would like everyone to be able to enjoy a safe summer. And I should add a shameless plug here with respect to getting vaccinated, because that is also part of enjoying a safe summer. So I want to encourage everyone to go out and get vaccinated. I'm fully vaccinated. Over 58% of the Metropolitan Police Department is fully vaccinated, and we continue to push forward. So please get vaccinated, get vaccinated, get vaccinated. Today is an opportunity to introduce you to our plans to launch this year's Summer Crime Prevention Initiative. MPD's SCI began on May 1st and will run throughout the summer until August 31st. As a reminder, during our Summer Crime Initiative, MPD identifies 6 focus areas that have historically experienced a high density of violent crime. We are then laser focused on providing those areas with all available resources and utilizing evidence-based and intelligence-driven strategies to combat crime, while partnering with other law enforcement agencies, community organizations, and advocates with a collective goal to reduce crime. Last year, the SCI area saw violent crime decrease by 10% and overall crime by 25%. That includes a reduction in robberies of 22% and burglaries decreasing by 29% in the target areas. Further, we were able to safely recover 115 illegal firearms in the SCI areas last year. Our number one goal with the SCI has not changed, and that is to reduce violent crime in the areas of the city that have traditionally been hit the hardest, while building positive relationships with those in the community. Over the past 11 years, the Summer Crime Initiative has resulted in positive impacts within the community. We have connected with countless community members and have seen significant reductions in crime each summer in the targeted areas. I am confident that under the capable leadership of the men and women who are leading the efforts in the Summer Crime Initiative areas this year, we will continue that trend. We have reviewed the crime statistics and met with MPD stakeholders to identify the following 2021 Summer Crime Initiative areas. Potomac Gardens in the 1st District will be led by Captain Tasha Bryant. Just raise your hand. Carver Langston as well as Rosedale will be led by Captain Paul Herbenek. Greenway Fort DuPont in the 6th District will be led by Captain Jonathan Branch. Marshall Heights Benning Ridge will be led by Captain Sean Connors. And we have Douglas Shipley, which will be led by Captain Damian Taylor. And last but certainly not least, Washington Highlands will be led by Captain Mike Jones. I have all of the faith in these captains that they will continue the trends of our past SCI areas where plans have been effective and crime has been significantly reduced in the areas. In addition to consistently working to reduce crime, we have also been able to conduct critical community outreach programs in the SCI areas each summer. This year, I have instituted a department-wide initiative that ensures all MPD members will be engaged in monthly outreach activities around the entire city, not only this summer, but year-round. So be on the lookout for a number of engagement activities and events coming to your neighborhood that will include community walks, public safety resource pop-ups, and clothing and food donations. We are well aware that our community wants to be part of the discussion and part of the ecosystem that helps us all work together towards a common crime reduction goal. Together, we can all collectively play an active, positive role in our neighborhoods to help reduce violence on a daily basis. I can now take any questions that you might have. Sam. Yeah, so we look at a lot of things, Sam. We look at homicides. We look at sounds of gunshots. We look at robberies. We look at, excuse me, primarily violent crime. But most importantly, we look in areas where things are happening right now. Sometimes when you look at crime statistics and you compare this year to last year, as an example, the things that were happening last year might not be happening right now this year. So we kind of take all of those things into consideration. We look at the numbers that support it, where the issues are, and that's how we make the decision.
Chief, is there anything new you can tell us about the 7-year-old who was shot?
She was up yesterday watching TV, so I'm encouraged by that. I'm also encouraged, as I look at some of the crimes that have occurred just in the last 30 days, I've been reaching out to community, talking to community about coming forward. If there is one positive thing that I will say is that in the last couple of cases that I've seen, including the ones from this weekend, we are receiving cooperation from community, and that's very important to the ecosystem that we have, to get cooperation from our communities. Some of the homicides that we are hopefully soon will be closing will close as a result of cooperation from community members, and I think that's very important. The mayor and I, when we talk, one of the things that she always says is the best way to prevent homicides is for us to close them when they do happen, and that happens when we work together with community. So I'm encouraged by that, Sam. It's unfortunate that someone decided to shoot in the direction where a 7-year-old child was out playing the other day. I guess it was on Saturday. But I think it just speaks to the fact that we must continue our effort as an entire ecosystem, not just MPD, but MPD, community, all the other stakeholders that are involved, to make sure that we keep our foot on violent crime, because these things, they do pop up in our city, and we want to make sure that we respond to them accordingly. Yes, ma'am.
Chief, you've talked about how during the summertime, we see more incidents happen. Last year, we saw record highs in certain crimes. Right now, we're at 38% with homicide. Yeah. What is so different this time around with this initiative that you feel is going to actually reach people?
Well, I think one of the things that we plan on doing, we want to double down on our efforts. Again, when we do these summer crime initiatives in the areas, last year we were really restricted in what we could do because we were at the height of the pandemic, and there was not a lot of connection with community. Our officers, what they normally would do in terms of engaging community, you wouldn't see a lot of that last year. And we certainly want to do more of that, because I think that that's how you get to safer communities, by engaging community members where they are. As you can see, we have a lot of police officers that are here, and that will span out into the communities as well. We want to be focused on those things that make communities unsafe, but we also want to be focused on connecting with communities so that we continue to build that trust with the residents in the District of Columbia. That's very important to us, and I'm hopeful that residents will see that. I started out a walk in Ward 8, I guess a couple of days ago, and we had probably about 40 or 50 residents that joined us on that walk. And again, it's just a part of just building that relationship. So you'll see more of that in the coming months. Yes, sir. And then this. You're next, ma'am. Right after this gentleman right here. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. You spoke about the importance of getting vaccinated, and I think you said 58% of the MPD force is vaccinated. Any explanation or speculation of why that number is not higher?
Actually, 58% in terms of from the time that when we first started issuing the vaccination. That's not bad. We want to see more people vaccinated. Obviously, people are making, personal choices. Some people may have been vaccinated in their home, in the states where they live, and they're not required to report that. So the number may be a little higher than what I reported, but we know for certain that we have 58%. And I'm just going to continue on encouraging the members of the Metropolitan Police Department to be fully vaccinated. Excuse me. Yes, ma'am.
If I could.
I'll come back to you, sir. Hold on one second. This lady here, we want to give her a chance to ask questions.
Oh, no, let him finish, because I...
Okay.
Would you or are you considering any kind of incentives for the remaining members of the force to get vaccinated? Bonuses, etc.?
Yeah, I want them to be healthy and safe. That's the incentive. I want them to be healthy and safe. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, hi. Chief Conti, my name is Sandra Phillips Gilbert,
Good morning.
and you are directly in my SMD. I am the ANC Commissioner for the Rosedale community.
Thank you for having us.
And I want to welcome you all to the Rosedale community. And because of our effort, the community got this new center. So
Amen.
Thank you so much. My question is, I'm being overwhelmed by my neighbors and community members that we're not receiving the support we need from MPD. Specifically, there's open air drug markets. We can't get any help. Various agencies, I've reached out, I can't get the support I need. And my community is afraid. They're overwhelming me with that. We don't see or get the support we need. Just recently, last week, I saw a message, a report that was done about the initiative in having public restrooms placed in various areas. And 17th and Benning Road was recommended by the 5th District Police and a few residents they spoke to put a state-of-the-art restroom in an open-air drug market. No one talked to me. No one asked me what my community need. What we need, we don't need to put a bathroom there to accommodate the poison that is being sold to the community. What we need is support to get the public, give the public a chance to live without the threat of being shot. The medical building is being threatened. The professionals there are asking me for help. They're getting ready to move out of the community. We need help. And I'm asking you, I'm pleading to all of you, Mayor, everybody. We can eradicate what's going on up there at 17th and Benning and 16th and Benning and Isherwood and East Street. We can make a change. And I'm asking you to help the community. We're dealing not only with homelessness and mental illness, but the drugs and everything is overwhelming me. I am only an elected volunteer.
Yes, ma'am.
And I need all of your support to help me help my community.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I can
In
tell
any
you
way
this.
you can help me.
You have my
Thank
support. Let's start
this
there.
year, let's get this out of here.
You have my support.
Let's get this out
And
of here.
whatever we need to do in terms of making sure that this community is safer, those are things that we need to do together. I agree. Together. That's the important piece, that it has to be done together. Because as you mentioned, there are issues that certainly extend beyond the responsibilities of the Metropolitan Police Department when you talk about people who have addiction issues and the like. So I think that engaging our other partners to try to address that is certainly part of it. Certainly we can try to arrest our way out of it, but I think history has told us that that certainly does not resolve the issues that you're talking about. If we're talking about seeing long-term change in community, then that's a collaborative effort that has to be addressed. So I think working closely with not just you, the commander of the 5th District, who has a responsibility for this area, as well as the other agencies. If we can set something up sooner rather than later, I will have Commander Fitzgerald to connect with you. But we'll get something set up soon so we can come out and then we can start addressing these issues.
Let me just say this. Okay, wait. I just want to say, let's eradicate that before the end of the year of the program, the initiative.
Let's make that a mutual goal.
That's what I want to see.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Chief, there has been, overall crime, of course, down, but the violent crime seems to be ticking up. The homicide seems to be ticking up. This horrible shooting. Is some of this out of your control? How frustrated are you by this? And what is going on that we've seen this uptick?
Yeah, it really ticks me off, to be quite frank with you. When we have these senseless acts of violence that occur in our city, D.C. is we're not an anomaly. Unfortunately, in a lot of the major cities around the country, we're seeing this. Even with our neighbors, that's in the surrounding jurisdictions, we're seeing this violence. And I think that we have to stand together as community, as law enforcement, and all stakeholders involved to say that these things are unacceptable. And when they happen in community, when they do happen in community, that we're going to stand together to eradicate those issues when they happen. The phone should be ringing off the hook right now as a result of what happened over there with that 7-year-old that got shot. But not just the 7-year-old. That was one of the other crimes that occurred this weekend. So I'm hopeful that we will work together to eradicate things here in the District of Columbia. We always talk about, whether it's, 5 more homicides, 2 more homicides. One is one too many. And the goal that I've set for my team, the question that I ask them every Thursday I ask them, what have we done to make sure that there's no more homicides that occur in our city? What have we done to support that individually? I'm asking them that question. But I'm also going to ask that question. I'm going to pose that same question to community and all those other stakeholders that are involved. What have we done to make sure that there's no homicides in community? When you see that crap game going on, when you see an individual in your community standing there with a firearm and you know he's carrying a firearm, what have we done to make sure that there's no homicides to occur in our city? So it really ticks me off when we have these types of events, but we got a lot of work ahead of us. We got a lot of work to do, and I'm hopeful that we're not in this by ourselves. Yes, sir, Tom.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chief. The New York Times reported, I think this morning, that in the first 3 months of this year, homicides are up 18% in 37 urban jurisdictions across the nation, and that's not even counting New York and Chicago, who haven't reported. So isn't all the things you're talking about, this crime initiative that you're doing, isn't the real issue guns in the city? No matter how many shot spotters you have, no matter how many patrols you have, no matter how many officers you have, that you can't really get to it?
Tom, so here's the thing. I think that we can together get to it, but I think that in our communities, we have to make sure that first of all, when those things happen, that people are held accountable for them. But these are things that cannot be tolerated in our communities. When you have individuals brazenly doing daytime shootings anywhere in our city, that's a loss for our entire community. And to the extent that people are willing to tolerate that kind of thing, when you know of individuals who are engaged in this type of behavior, is beyond me. Again, phones should be ringing off the hook when these things happen. The mayor mentioned a little earlier about the surveillance photos. We have made an effort to put out images of individuals involved in crime, carrying firearms, committing shootings. And when those things happen, again, credit to the community. I must say, here lately, I'll give credit where credit is due. People have been calling in, but it should be more of that going on. And I'm looking forward to it, Tom. We'll continue to press on. We'll continue to work with community to do the things that we need to do to make sure that that's not happening here in the District of Columbia.
Quickly follow up, Mayor.
Excuse me. Let me just add. You asked the question. I want to respond to it. In addition to what the chief said, you asked if it's guns, and certainly it is guns, but it's also the people who will use guns in the places where they're most likely to use guns. And that's why the initiative that we're building, in addition to all of the efforts that MPD has in place, is building blocks that will help us concentrate on the places where we know there's a high incidence of violence, high incidence of people who have been violent, and how do we focus services for those people, their families, but also the neighborhoods, or the blocks, if you will, that could be contributing to that violence. So, and if there was a simple answer, Tom, these guys would be out of business. It's not a simple answer. So that's why we have the whole of government focusing on the people we know who are committing these crimes in the places where that crime is most intense.
Thank you, Mayor. That was my follow-up. What else? What other parts of the city government are you mobilizing? And you just answered it, so thank you.
Yep.
The last question for the chief was, what is the status of the gun recovery unit? You talked about giving it new orders and new standards about how it can be done to get the guns. What are those new orders and new standards? Briefly.
Thank you. Just really briefly. So we're focusing their efforts. They're more intelligent-led. We have some new training that's coming for them, which should be kicking off here within the next week or so. Working with several of our partners. They're still going out and they're still getting guns, but we're doing it a lot smarter, in my opinion. So I will continue. As long as we have a gun problem in this city, and as long as we have people who are continuously pulling out illegal firearms in the hands of people who should not have them, we will continue as a department to focus on recovering illegal guns in this city to make this city safe for not just me and my family, but everybody that's standing out here today. Yes, sir. This gentleman here, and then Mark, I'll come to you. Yes, sir.
Chief Conte, I have two independent questions. My first is that you do have set up what I call these hotspots throughout the city for the Summer Crime Initiative. But what is your message to residents who are not in those areas? What would you say to them when they see all the resources going to those areas, but they need resources too? Second of all, part of your stakeholders in terms of this initiative may be the cadet program. Could you talk a little bit about the cadet program, the fact that this class is majority female, and how do you see it progressing as a former cadet?
Thank you so much for that question, James. Yeah, so for the areas that are not Summer Crime Initiative areas, and again, we've been doing this for a number of years now, we don't neglect them. We do not police in those areas. We do not engage community in those areas. Those things will go on. What we realize as a result of the Summer Crime Initiative area is that some of these areas, they need a little extra, right, as a result of the crimes and the violence that have occurred in those areas. It's not to discount crimes that have occurred in other areas, but in these areas where we need a little extra, that's what we intend to do. We intend to give them extra support in the form of law enforcement resources, but as the mayor just mentioned a minute ago, the whole of government approach in those areas. So we're not going to neglect other communities. The second part of your question regarding the police cadet program, obviously I'm very proud of the police cadet program. Right now we have over 100. We have 100 police cadets. The majority of them are females. All of them are for our kids who, well, they're not kids anymore, but they're right here from this city. They graduated from a D.C. high school. They live right here in our city. I think that they are a very important part of it. We have a lot of them out here today. They'll continue to engage communities right where they are at the various events that we'll be having around the city. So we want to continue to build on that. We want to continue to hire from within our city. I think it's important for the police department, but more importantly, I think it's important for our city that we have these young people. Certainly, you know, I am an example of that, and I look forward to working with them and all the things that they will do in community. I think we were over here, Mark.
Thanks, Chief.
Yes, sir.
Could I ask a couple of questions about the body-worn camera footage released with the fatal shooting? One, have you or will you be identifying the police officer?
I believe that we have.
Okay, and then can you tell us if the gun was operable and loaded?
Yes.
Was operable and loaded?
Yes, to both.
And then you've released the body-worn camera from the officer who fired the shot, but will you release the body-worn camera from the second officer who was in the room? Because when we look at that video, and your narrative of it is that the subject pointed the gun at an officer and the woman in the room, it does not appear that he's pointing it at the officer who fired it. It's not from the vantage point that we see from the body-worn camera. So we don't actually ever see him pointing the gun at that officer. Would you release the video that shows him actually pointing it at an officer and at that woman?
There was an extended video that was released, I think, right before the press conference. That's about 9 minutes long. So I would just say take a look at that, and you may have a better vantage point from the second video.
And so will you be releasing the second officer's video?
No, we are. Okay, it's up. My team is saying that it's up.
I appreciate that.
It's not up. Later for the second one. Okay, later today or tomorrow.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
And then also in your narrative, you say that the officers provided first aid until paramedics arrived. We don't see that in the video. And in fact, video that NBC has obtained from a neighbor, we don't see that either. We see those two officers remaining at the front door. And in fact, he's talking to the man who, because he's talking to him, we assume he's still alive and moving. When exactly did those officers begin first aid?
Yeah, you'll see that in the extended version of the video clip that's released. At some point, I'm not sure when you'll have an opportunity to review it, but you'll see it when they render first aid.
How many minutes into it was it?
I don't know the exact amount of minutes. At some point, once the officers felt that things were safe to do so, they began to administer first aid. As you mentioned, they were talking. There was some, I don't know if won't necessarily say it was conversation, but there was some talking that was happening amongst the officers, and they were giving some directives to the individual before they were able to retrieve the gun off of the bed, and then after that, at some point, they gave medical assistance. Okay, this gentleman back here, and then we'll come up front.
Hold on 1 second, Stephanie.
Chief Conte, can we ask you separately? We've been reporting on the drag racing incident reported in Northeast DC.
Yeah.
For the residents there, can you please provide an update on that investigation? We've talked to defense attorneys who said that the officers would at least get a speeding ticket by now. Why hasn't that been done, or what's going on here?
Yeah, so our internal affairs, well, first of all, let me back up a little bit. So one of the officers that was involved was a probationary officer. That individual was terminated, I guess, early last week, maybe Monday, I guess it was. That individual was terminated on Monday. The other individuals that are involved are part of the internal affairs investigation that will be going over to the Office of the Attorney General for their judicial review to make a determination on what the next steps will be, if there will be any charges that come out of this investigation. Obviously, those types of things are unacceptable. They're embarrassing. It's not something that we tolerate. It's certainly something that I do not tolerate as the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department. So the investigation will continue. But like I said, just a quick recap: one individual was terminated on Monday, and the other individuals that is part of the investigation that will go to OAG for review. Yes, sir.
So, on your order of last week on the health in the pandemic, there was one aspect of that has raised a certain amount of concern, particularly among couples getting married and wedding planners. It says there's no standing or dancing at wedding receptions. What is the rationale for that portion of the order?
I'm not sure if I don't want to refer to a specific order, but if you're asking about being seated at large gatherings, that's been our posture throughout the response to the pandemic, and we haven't turned that up. So we don't have like standing room at events that's permitted.
There's an aspect of it that deals specifically with weddings. And it is
Well,
25%.
Yeah, recently we have allowed venues. It could be restaurants, it could be hotel rooms, it could be meeting rooms, to have 25% capacity. Before May 1st, they weren't permitted to have any event in those spaces. So actually on May 1st, we turned on those activities for our venue operators, for hotels, conference rooms, convention center. So now that they can now have events.
In your sense that standing or dancing presents a greater risk of spreading the virus?
It's not my sense. It's a public health sentiment that we are still maintaining physical distance. And in venues where there's other activity that adds risk for the spread of COVID, like alcohol consumption, is even more significant that people maintain social distancing. We were able to relax another guideline in that regard, where we had before May 1st a limit of 6 people per table. Is now 10 people per table. So we want to let people know that they can host events and they can host them safely. And now's the time to look at some of those hotel venues who have capacity. Yes, Sam.
Mayor, I saw this thing where you said you can now go into. If you've been vaccinated, you can now go into businesses without a mask. Is that correct?
I think you know, Sam, that there was a update to a mayor's order on Saturday, and you should refer to that mayor's order for all of mask requirements. Yes.
I'd like to follow up on that. Thank you for bringing that up, Sam. Can you tell us why that order changed on Saturday? And can you just clarify for people who are confused, if you're fully vaccinated, What can you do indoors without a mask right now?
Okay. I'm going to tell everybody, go to the mayor's order to read it for themselves. That's number one. Number two, there was an error out of my office. That's just plain and simple. And so what is correct was posted on Saturday.
Can you just clarify for people who are business owners who wonder, should I tell someone to put on a mask if they come into my business?
I'm going to have the public health department go through the order with you. Yes. Kobe.
Yes, sir.
I apologize.
Yes, sir.
This sounds like a micro question, but I want to go back to what the commissioner just said about 17th and Penn.
Yeah.
Because it's an area I've known all my life, and I've been in this world for a long time.
Yep.
So she stands there and she says there's an open-air drug market there. She says it to the chief of police. She says it in the presence of the district commander. Does it exist? Does it exist? And if it exists, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
today?
Thank you. So certainly we have to go out there and address it. I mean, to the point that the commissioner made, the commissioner lives here. She walked past this location every day. If the commissioner says it exists, we have a responsibility to go out there. I think what we have to do is, once we go out and we make those arrests, for those that are engaging in the illegal drug activity, I think the important piece for us to do is to then follow those things and see what happens. For example, if they're out here selling marijuana, as an example, what happens with that case after the individuals are arrested? Are those individuals simply turned loose back to the city to keep on doing what it is they do? Or do they go through our judicial process and held accountable? So I think that's important. So to the extent that the commissioner says that it exists, we have a responsibility to go out, arrest those who are in violation of the law, quite frankly. Mark, and then this guy, and then we'll come back to you, Mr. King. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I have a follow-up for
Sure.
Chief, and then an off-topic for the mayor. But
Yep.
Chief, just following up on the drag racing, the probationary officer who was released, was he driving one of the cars?
He was.
Do you know what car number 1 or car number 2?
Well, what are you categorizing this car one, car two?
Well, you categorize him in the incident report.
Right.
The car on the outside on the left who turned in front of the car was car number 2.
No, he was the one that was driving, the car that was driving straight.
That
So car number 2 would have been the other one that turned in front.
I appreciate that very much. And on that, will you release the body-worn camera from those officers?
Yes.
You will.
Yeah, there's a video. I think if it's not out there, it will be. It's being prepared for release. So yeah,
I appreciate
they are
that.
working on it. Yep.
And then Mayor Bowser, if I could ask you, and I actually have the same question for Chairman Mendelson about Dr. Smith and Department of Forensic Sciences. You know, given the hearing that we heard the other day, apparently, I guess, whose decision was it for her not to testify?
It was mine.
And why was that?
There's an ongoing investigation.
Do you still have full confidence in her?
I think we have a question to ask ourselves as the district, and that is if we want an independent forensics lab or not. And to be honest with you, that the questions around that, I am still wrestling with.
Chairman Mendelson, can I ask you, do you have full confidence in Dr. Smith? What do you recommend to the mayor as far as her future? Dr. Smith.
As far as the mayor's future, I recommend everything positive for her future.
Thank you, Phil.
You're welcome. Any other easy questions like that?
Yeah, let's go back to the hard ones.
Now, I've not discussed this with the mayor, so you're asking me to kind of get out in front of her a little, which makes me uncomfortable. But my understanding is that the lab is or is going to be losing its accreditation. And if it loses its accreditation, then I would say I don't have confidence. I was the author of the legislation that created the independent lab, and I see the lab as critical to public safety and justice, and I have to emphasize and justice, because what the lab is about is separate from MPD or the U.S. Attorney or any of the parties in a criminal case. The lab analyzes evidence using science, forensic science, to determine whether, in fact, the evidence can be tied to the alleged perpetrator. I mean, it's that simple. And what we have seen across the country over the years is that when you don't have an independent lab, then it just becomes a mess, either for the prosecutor or for the police. And that's not in the interest of justice or public safety. So we want the best lab there can be. The legislation requires that it has to be accredited. And so I'll just go back to that. If that's at issue, that is a very serious concern for me.
Have you or Deputy Mayor Gebhardt been informed of the status of the accreditation?
I've not talked to the Deputy Mayor. I've not talked to the Mayor about this.
What was your question? I'm sorry.
Have you been notified on the status of the accreditation? Has it been removed?
It is suspended. We have submitted an appeal to that suspension. We don't expect the accrediting body to act on it before the specified 30 days that they had indicated, which for us is problematic, but it is their process. Okay, I want to take a round. You haven't asked a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon. So restaurant owners and restaurant workers continue to have the same one big ask, and that's for advance notice about the reopening process.
Yep.
And so they want to know if there's any kind of plan in motion to develop a step-by-step guide for certain metrics like vaccination percentage that will lead to certain reopening, as other states have started to do, like Michigan. Is that on the table? Is that something you're thinking about? They just want to be able to plan so they can staff up, so they can decide whether or not to open.
Well,
things like that.
I think the best planning metric that we have for them is our case count, as we have said repeatedly. But we are, of course, following vaccination trends as well. So let me just give you a situation. I could set a metric for vaccination. That's, let's face it, we're creeping towards getting up to that metric. And that could be far off. I can't even really predict that. Or, and what if we were out there with this far out vaccination metric and we have, we're in the green for our transmission rates? What makes the most sense? And what our public health experts say to us is, regardless of if we get up to the numbers that we want to achieve herd immunity, if the transmission rates are low, then an individual's risk of getting the virus is also low. So that is why we focus on the transmission metrics, keeping in mind that we're different than we were last year, because we do have many, many more people every single day getting vaccinated. So the short answer to our restaurateurs, and let me just say this, I feel where they are. Our restaurateurs, our venue operators, our nightclub operators were the first impacted, and they're the last to come back. So I get it. And so we want them to be able to stay open, keep their workers safe, and keep their patrons safe. And in that regard, we are hosting with one of our restaurateurs today, I think as we speak, a vaccination clinic at Hook Hall, which is located on Georgia Avenue. You can go without a registration or appointment and start your vaccination process. You bet. Yes, ma'am.
For Chairman Mendelson, I have one more question for you if you're up for it. The bill about school funding that says no school could see its budget cut. Some of these schools are going to have significant decreases in enrollment. And I wanted to ask if you think this bill is appropriate for this year and how much you think it would cost.
Well, it depends on what you mean by significant decrease in enrollment. The emergency legislation provides that if there is a fewer grade, I didn't say that quite right, but there are some schools where they're losing a grade to a middle school, for example, that in that case there could be an adjustment to the budget. But I'll go back to what is a significant change in enrollment. The way I view it is that a school is a community. It's a community with a number of teachers and a number of classrooms. And just because the enrollment may have dropped 10 students or 12 students, that may be spread among different grades, and so it may not equal a class or a teacher. And so when their funding is cut equal to an FTE, a teacher, that school is harmed. And we need to be looking at our schools as communities and building those communities. So I won't say that schools have had the right budgets this year, but at least we've gotten through this year. So next year we should build on that. And that's what that legislation is about, is saying that we don't want to see reductions in the budgets for the schools. I think I indicated earlier, the Chancellor spoke with me on over the weekend, and I believe it was with the mayor. He better have worked with the mayor on this, that there's some additional funding that's going to DCPS, and that as a result, the devil's in the details, but generally speaking, schools' budgets are going to be kept whole. I think actually the way it was put was that schools' budget requests had all been honored. Again, the devil's in the details, but I hope that answers your question.
Do you have a cost estimate for this bill?
Well, the emergency itself does not have a fiscal impact because it's within the DCPS budget. But as I said, I think it's $14 million that was announced on Thursday night. That's federal money, so that would be additional money into the schools.
Okay, let's take a few more. Lou?
Yes, Mayor, a quick question for the Chief, if I could. Chief, one of the issues that seems to come up in terms of MPD from time to time with the public and the media is when and why is information sometimes withheld. Obviously, it needs to be withheld in some instances, but I was just wondering, and the example I'll just give is that other tragic shooting of the child who was sitting in his father's car that happened a few months ago where...
Carmelo Duncan?
Yes. Not too much has been released on whether or not MPD knows if there was a reason why the father's car was targeted and so forth, and I'm just wondering if you could explain to the public the rationale behind releasing and not releasing information.
Thank you. Yeah, for that question, I appreciate that. We're still seeking the public's assistance, first of all. So anyone who has information about that tragic case, please call us 202-727-9099 or text us anonymously at 50411. To answer your question, Lou, the bottom line is we don't want to do anything that ultimately could compromise the investigation. When you're talking about holding people accountable, sometimes as a result of homicide investigations, the perpetrators of that, they are arrested sometimes within days, sometimes within weeks, sometimes within months, just really depending on the investigation. I can tell you that the investigation continues to progress forward. We're still working on it. I got a briefing on it maybe about a week ago, I guess now, with some interesting new dynamics to the investigation, and our investigators, they continue to work very hard to bring that family closure to that case.
Okay, Tom, Mitch, Colby, Stephanie, in that order, and then I'll have the last community question.
Thank you, Mayor. This is for you.
Okay.
The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Charles Allen, was upset that the forensic director last week didn't appear at his hearing. You just said that there is an investigation going on. Is it an administrative investigation or a criminal investigation?
I know that the Office of the Inspector General is investigating. And do you have anything more to add to that, Chris? Office of the Inspector General, we know, is investigating.
Could be criminal or civil, administrative.
It could be. He has. If the Inspector General found evidence of a crime, he would refer it to the USAO.
Okay, you're not aware at this moment, you personally, that it's a criminal investigation?
I know that the USAO, before Jesse Liu left office, it was investigating the matter. She issued a report to say that she found no crimes, and she was referring it to the Inspector General for a management review. Anything else to add to that? And let me also say I had the opportunity to talk to the chair of the Judiciary Committee before the hearing and let him know that the director would not be able to appear on my decision because of that ongoing investigation. Who's next? Yes, Mitch.
You announced the Building Blocks initiative back in February. Could you give us an update on that initiative, if it's expanded at all past the initial blocks? And
sure.
I think there was a website attached to that I don't think is live yet. Is that
okay?
When can we expect that?
Let me ask Director Harley Harper to give you a quick update.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Harley Harper, the Gun Violence Prevention Director, and I appreciate your question. We absolutely are working in collaboration with the Summer Crime Initiative. We have used the initial blocks that we started in to develop an infrastructure within Building Blocks that we will be able to duplicate as we move to additional blocks moving forward. We are in full partnership with MPD around the Summer Crime Initiative and working through exactly how we're going to have synergy between the two as the Summer Crime Initiative moves on. We also are going to be working in the additional 151 blocks that have been identified for building blocks. There is an intersection between the building blocks and the Summer Crime Initiative blocks. I believe there are 45 blocks that are building blocks, identified blocks, as well as Summer Crime Initiative areas. So we will be working in synergy with MPD around those. And the website is being created, but we do have a live email address that the community has been actively using to submit suggestions around gun violence prevention and concerns, etc. And it's buildingblocks@dc.gov. And we hope to have the website up soon, and we certainly will send out notices throughout when we are able to put the website live.
Another question for Deputy Mayor Geltart, if that's all right. I'm looking for an update on the man who was found deceased in the jail. It was, I believe, reported on Friday, though I think it was reported he actually died on Monday. So an update on his status, perhaps, cause of death, if you have it, and why did it take so long for that death to become known publicly?
Sure. We made notifications next of kin and all of that as quickly as we could. The chief medical examiner has performed his autopsy. We're still waiting on some toxicology reports, so we don't have a cause and manner at this time, but that should be coming this week.
Yes, ma'am.
This is for the chief, actually. As we were meeting here, the head of the police union just issued a press release to everyone highlighting low officer morale since the D.C. Council passed the emergency police reform bill last summer. Now, it's alleging large numbers of resignation still. We've heard some about this, but today in this press release, Craig Pemberton writes that nearly 150 members have just turned in their badge and walked away. The total strength of the rank and file is less than 3,300, the lowest number in decades. Can we have your response to this, since you're here now, how this will impact the crime initiative that we're talking about right now, and for the officers, what you hope that this will do?
So we're not down to 3,300, but the numbers are reduced, and it is a concern. We've been talking about a shrinking workforce for some time now. This is not the first time that this has occurred, and I would strongly say that it's something that we need to continue to not just watch, but it's something that eventually we must act on in terms of making sure that our force is at the strength where it needs to be. MPD, every year we lose officers to resignation, retirement, termination, even we lose officers to that. Certainly we want to make sure that our officers who are out here doing the job, that they are properly supported with the resources that they need. As you know, the mayor presented a budget for the Metropolitan Police Department at the beginning of the budget cycle to say, hey, this is what the Metropolitan Police Department needs to do. This is what the Metropolitan Police Department, the funding that the Metropolitan Police Department needs to do, what it needs to do in community and hiring, etc. That it didn't turn out that way, unfortunately. But nevertheless, we still have a public safety responsibility to the community, so we'll continue to do that. We have to support our officers. In addition to supporting our officers, I don't just mean that in word, I also mean that in deed, by making sure that we have the resources that we need so that officers are out here in community properly staffed and so forth. So I certainly appreciate the chairman's position on this. He certainly has the has to put out things for the membership, for the community. But as the Metropolitan Police Department's chief, I can tell you that we're not at an all-time low in terms of morale. Our officers, we're checking in with them, making sure that the mental health and well-being, that they're good there. We just brought on our well-being coordinator for our members, and we'll continue to do the things that we need to do to support them.
Yeah, just for the chief and probably the former
Yes,
DYRS director as well. Been trying to get a fix on juvenile arrests in the district. Last year, I got some data, and I wonder whether the arrest numbers have gone up over a year, whether arrests for felonies has gone up or gone down. I wonder how many of the youth who are being arrested now are DYRS involved youth, or youth who have been involved in the DYRS system. Can you?
Yeah, I can answer a part of that. I'm not sure about the DYRS numbers and so forth, but I can tell you for last year, the arrest of juveniles, it went way down. Probably about a 40% reduction in juvenile arrests. And I think that the primary reason for that. In a COVID environment, less contact with individuals, we start to see a decline in overall arrests, not just juveniles, but in overall arrests. So, not that we're looking again to arrest our way out of a situation. I think when we look at the arrest stats, the other thing that we look at is like how many times has this person been arrested and then rearrested. I think those are also important metrics to look at and examine. As we look at crime and crime trends, certainly when it comes to violent crime, we want to make sure that whether it's a juvenile, an adult, whoever, that people are being held accountable for those crimes, especially when they do things that seriously disrupt community. I'll let one of my colleagues, I'm not sure, maybe we can talk about the DYRS piece.
Thank you for the question. Not talking about the arrest, the chief covered that. As far as the youth and DYRS, as you know, that's on the judicial system to determine as they come in and go through their process. One of the things we've been hamstrung throughout this COVID environment is the ability for the courts to keep up with the cases that are going on. So right now the real push is on working with the courts to allow them to open back up and start to do the amount of cases that we need to do so that we're not keeping people in incarceration longer than they need to be, and so that they get their day in court. Some of the youth are going to DYRS. It is a dependency on the judicial system to look at the circumstances of the case and say which ones get referred to DYRS, and then others are going back out into the community with supervision from the courts. So that's where we are now.
DYRS involved already?
How many are as a recidivism kind of question that you're asking? How many have been involved with DYRS?
Or in the system already, DYRS system already?
Sure. We can pull those numbers and take a look at that right now. The recidivism rate, we're seeing a mix across the board in that.
We'll have to get you some specifics on that, Kobe. Okay. Was it Willie?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Just while I have the mayor and the chief here, I'm talking about prevention, crime prevention. And I think sports do stop some of this crime prevention. And me, as I grew up in the city and grew up right here, sports helped me a lot. So as the one thing I want to know, steady y'all talking about defunding the police. Let's bring back the Boys and Girls Club. What y'all think about that? Because that helped me a lot. Because I played baseball here at Rosedale, and then I went to number 9 and played baseball also. So I had 2 games in one day. So if we talk about crime, let's talk about preventing crime. And instead of you talking about defunding the police, let's talk about an avenue that we could bring the youth back out so we could teach them some other stuff, because it's life skills and everything in sports. Team camaraderie and community building, all that stems in sports. Number 9 took me to my out-of-town game. I was 11 years old. We went to Roanoke, Virginia. So I thought I was way down the country playing a baseball game, but it took me out of town. Then it got me to think about bigger things, broader things, instead of my 5 blocks right here. Because all I knew was my 5 blocks right here. But when I be able to get out of town and play some baseball, it really helped me. So I'm just asking you, the mayor and the chief, to get together and just think about this sports piece in the city. Because look at this beautiful center. Y'all building all these beautiful centers at DPR. And like I said, we're not even on a national rank. Sports,
well,
we should be.
I agree with you.
So I'm passionate about this DPR because I was born into DPR, and I want to know why we're not in national rank, because we got all the facilities. Everybody want to come and play for your city. Come and play in the city.
Okay, so I couldn't agree with you more, and I know that Delano, our director for DPR, and all of our DPR staff couldn't agree with you more. We have invested a credible amount in our recreation centers and fields. They have become the envy of the region instead of our neighbors going out all over the region to fields. So you're talking about programming, and we want to make sure that the programming is robust and engaging to get young people in, but also that we have trusted community members that can be our ambassadors, quite frankly. So we're gonna stay on those issues. the challenge that you also issued is why we should be producing in this city more world-class athletes. And I agree with you. And so we have to figure out how to keep our athletes here, whether it's our schools, public schools, charter schools, parks and rec, travel leagues, make sure they have what they need instead of letting all these other schools and states poach our athletes. So we want to raise them up and send them off from DC too. So thank you everybody for coming today.